In this section, I'm going to be talking about the output functions. So these are the functions that are used in the user interface to bring outputs that have been computed by the server. So anytime you call an output function on the user interface, the server is going to calculate an output function, and we're going to declare the variable, the output variable at the server. After the server computes it, then we call it on the UI. So these are the functions that bring out our output on the user interface. So those are the functions we're going to be talking about in this section. So the first output we are going to be talking about is the text output. The text output takes the output from the server and prints it out for the user to see on the UI. So after computation has already been done, maybe it is a text, then it is going to bring it out for us on the UI. So let's say, for example, now we want to print, let's say, for example, we want to print a name. So we'll now declare the name of, we're going to give the ID of name to our output, so that when we want to refer to it at the UI, we are going to use the name ID. So the text output goes like this, the text output function. So basically what you are telling your text output to do is that any variable in the server that you see with the ID name, any variable output you see the ID name, the text output should bring it out on the user interface. So it is now in this server that are now going to declare what the name output is going to consist of. And most of these output functions usually have their respective render functions, which is used in the server. That is to render those variables. So for text output, you use render text. So use render text for the text output. So here I can now write my name is dash dash dash. So now when I run my app, you are going to see that it is going to show. So you can see that it is showing my name is dash dash dash. So this is how the text output works. If I'm to use a wrong ID, for example, I'm to use N, and I run this app. So the link between the user interface and the server side is going to be broken because the output is not referencing to the ID at the user interface. So we have to use the user interface is not referencing to the ID at the server. So we have to use the correct ID. So if I'm to change this output ID to N, then that means at this place I'm going to use N also. And when I run the app, I'm going to get my text. So let's say, for example, also we use the select, or let's say we use the text input. Let's say we use the text input. If I'm to use the text input and I have ID N and the label name, so now I'm now going to say text output. So this is for the user to give in the name, and this is for the user interface to give out the name. That is to print it out on the web app. Now I'm not going to refer to it as, let's say, name. So now, if I want the user name to print out on the web app, then I'm now going to reference the text output at the server side to the user interface. So I'm going to use name. Then inside the render text function, I'm now going to give the input, and the ID is N. So this is going to bring out any input text that the user gives on the user interface. So when I say John, you can see it gives John. When I say Joseph, you can see it gives Joseph. When I say Anna, it gives Anna. So anytime this input changes, it also changes at the server side in the output. So that is what the text output is all about. The next function I'm going to be talking about is the verbatim text output, and its corresponding render function is render print. So unlike the text output, the verbatim text output prints code. So for example, let me say called verbatim text output. So then let me see log log. So I can now say output to reference to log. So I will now use render print. So unlike the text output where I used render text, the verbatim text output corresponding render function is render print. Then I can now say log of 10. So when I run my app, it's going to return a code. It's going to return the output. You can see it, 2.302585. So that is what the verbatim text output does. So anytime you have a computation you want to run, or you have a code you want to run, then use the verbatim text output. So the two output functions I'm going to be discussing are the plot output and the table output. So just like the ones we have also discussed, the plot output from the name, it outputs plots, while the table output from its name outputs a table. So anytime you have an output that you have already computed at your server side, or you have a table output that have already computed at your server side, or you have a plot that have already computed at your server side, these are the functions I'm going to be using. So for example, now I've already named my output plot variable plot and that of my table table. So when I come to my server side, I'm going to say output, type output plot. So the corresponding render function for the plot output is render plot. So I'm going to be using the empty cast dataset plot empty cast. And for that of the table, I'm going to say output table. So I'm using the name. I will give the name table, so the user interface goes to reference to this particular name table. So render table, and I'll now say table, or let me just say empty cast. This is a data set, so it's going to print out the data set on our web app. So let's run it. So you can see we already have our plots and we have our table. So those are the two output functions you are going to use. If you want your plots to show on your web app, you are going to use the plot output, and if you want your table to show on the web app, you use the table output.